Wind cuts across your skin like 1,000 tiny blades. The temperature out there can drop to 40 below zero. No down jacket. No central heating. Just you, a few animal hides, and darkness that stretches across most of the day. This is not a survival challenge on television. This was the ordinary life of your ancestors for over 100,000 years, when most of the northern hemisphere lay buried under kilometers of ice. Today, if the power goes out for a few hours on a winter night, you already feel panic. So how did your ancestors not just survive, but raise children, tell stories around the fire, and pass life all the way down to you, in the middle of one of the harshest environments humanity has ever faced? The answer lies in a chain of remarkable innovations that archaeologists are still uncovering today. Let's start with the most basic question: how harsh was the last ice age, really? Around 26,000 years ago, during a period called the last glacial maximum, the point when ice sheets covered their largest area on Earth, global average temperatures were about 5 to 6 degrees Celsius lower than today. That might not sound like much. But in regions like Europe and Northern Asia, where your ancestors lived, that difference turned lush grasslands into a frozen expanse known as the mammoth steppe, a cold, dry ecosystem that was, surprisingly, still teeming with life. So how did humans survive there? The first and most important answer is shelter. Not the simple huts you might be picturing. At the archaeological site of Mezhyrich in Ukraine, scientists excavated the remains of houses built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Not a few decorative bones. The entire structure. A typical house used roughly 95 mammoth jawbones just for the foundation and walls. Picture that scene. You and your group stacking massive jawbones into a circle, raising curved tusks upward to form the roof frame, then covering it all with animal hides stitched together. This structure didn't just block the wind. It retained heat so effectively that a small fire could warm the entire living space through a long winter night. This was not accidental. This was engineering. Archaeologist Olga Soffer, who spent much of her career studying Ice Age sites in Eastern Europe, pointed out that these structures required advanced planning, group cooperation, and technical knowledge passed down through generations. These were not people merely trying to survive day to day. These were engineers. But shelter is only part of the story. You also needed something to wear. For decades, archaeologists struggled to find direct evidence of Ice Age clothing, since hides and fibers rarely survive tens of thousands of years. But there was an unexpected clue: lice. In 2010, a research team led by geneticist Mark Stoneking analyzed the DNA of body lice, a species that lives specifically on clothing and is evolutionarily distinct from hate lice. By calculating when these two species diverge, they estimated that humans began wearing clothing regularly somewhere between 70,000 and 140,000 years ago. That means your ancestors already had clothing long before they pushed into the coldest reaches of the Ice Age. And direct archaeological evidence confirms this. At sites like Sungir in Russia, dating to around 30,000 years ago, archaeologists found burials accompanied by thousands of mammoth ivory beads, arranged in dense rows along the body, precisely where they would have been sewn onto leather garments, had the fabric itself survived. Based on the bead patterns, researchers were able to reconstruct the shape of the clothing: tightly sewn one-piece suits, hooded coverings, and boots, strikingly similar to garments still worn by Arctic Inuit peoples today. Layered, tightly sewn clothing, combined with a warm shelter, that's two of the three survival essentials. The third is food. This is where the story gets far more interesting than you might expect. You might picture the Ice Age as a barren, lifeless wasteland. But the mammoth steppe was actually one of the most productive grasslands ever to exist on Earth. It supported enormous herds of animals: woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, wild horses, reindeer, and bison, or adapted to endure the cold. Hunting these massive animals was no easy task. But your ancestors developed remarkably sophisticated strategies. At the site of Krakow Specista in Poland, archaeologists found the remains of dozens of mammoths killed in the same area, evidence that humans drove entire herds toward disadvantageous terrain, possibly ravines or steep riverbanks, where they became easier to bring down. This was group hunting, requiring complex coordination among many members, possibly including the use of fire or noise to direct the animal's movement. A single adult mammoth could provide enough meat, fat, and hide to sustain an entire group for weeks. And almost no part of the animal went to waste. Bones were used to build shelters. Sinew became thread and bowstrings. Fat fueled simple stone lamps for light and warmth. So let's reconstruct a day in your life, in the middle of the Ice Age. You wake inside your mammoth-bone house, the fire having burned through the night thanks to someone keeping watch in shifts. Outside, snow stretches white to the horizon. You pull on your layered hide clothing, draw the hood up over your ears. Today, a group of hunters will head out, tracking a reindeer herd spotted a few days earlier. Others stay behind, repairing tools, mending clothing, caring for young children, or processing hides from the previous hunt. No one faces this cold alone. Survival here depends entirely on the group. And here is the counterintuitive twist you need to understand: the Ice Age, one of the harshest periods in Earth's climate history, may have actually been the driving force behind some of humanity's greatest leaps in cognitive and social development. When environmental pressure rises, cooperation becomes mandatory, not optional. Groups had to share information about food sources, coordinate large-scale hunts, and pass increasingly complex tool-making knowledge down through generations. Archaeologist Ian Tattersall has argued that it was precisely during this period of intense survival pressure that complex language, symbolic art, and wide-reaching social networks developed faster than ever before. Think about that. Some of the most striking artworks humans ever created, the cave paintings at Chauvet in France, dated to around 36,000 years ago, were painted by people living in the depths of the Ice Age. They weren't just trying to survive. They were making meaning, telling stories, leaving proof that they had existed. Here lies the paradox: the harshest cold forged some of humanity's warmest and most profound expressions. And perhaps this is the most worthwhile thing to reflect on. Your ancestors did not survive the Ice Age through superior individual strength, or a greater tolerance for cold than other animals. They survived through their ability to cooperate, innovate, and adapt together. When you face a major challenge in modern life, a tight deadline, a financial crisis, a difficult stretch of illness, your first instinct is often to try to push through it alone. But your body and brain, shaped over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, were built to seek support from others during the hardest moments. The wind still cuts like 1,000 tiny blades. The temperature can still drop to 40 below zero. But your ancestors never faced it alone, and perhaps that was the real secret that let them, and eventually you, survive to this day.